I'm sitting on a plastic chair in a hostel dormitory in Playa del Carmen. The air conditioning hasn't worked in 3 days. My laptop died yesterday and I don't have money to fix it. I just tried to book a flight back to Chicago. My card got declined. The hostel's charging me 400 pesos a night, about $22, and I can't even afford that much longer. My savings account shows $247. 2 years ago, I landed at Cancun Airport with $180,000 in my bank account and a plan to live the remote work dream. I thought I was buying freedom. I was buying a very expensive lesson about what happens when you mistake a vacation for a life plan. 2 years earlier, I was sitting in a conference room in downtown Chicago. The view was spectacular. Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, but I felt like I was suffocating. I was 45 years old, senior engineering manager at a mid-sized tech company, making $140,000 a year plus bonuses. Good job, stable company, great benefits, the kind of job people work their whole lives to get. The problem was, I'd gotten it, and it felt like a prison sentence. That's when it hit me. I was wasting whatever good years I had left sitting in conference rooms talking about problems that didn't matter to anyone outside this building. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier. Sarah got the house in Naperville. I got the 401k and the freedom to do whatever I wanted with my life for the first time since I was 22 years old. No kids, no mortgage, no obligations except to myself. During the lunch break, I walked to Grant Park and sat by the lake. I pulled up Instagram on my phone, scrolled through posts from college friends. That's when I saw Jason's post. Jason had been my roommate senior year at Northwestern, and he'd been posting from Mexico for the past 6 months. Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Cozumel, beach offices, sunset co-working spaces, dinners that cost $12. The caption read, "Year 2 of the nomad life, never going back to cubicle prison. If you can work remotely, why wouldn't you live somewhere like this? If he could make it work, why couldn't I?" That night, I started researching. Mexico had become a hub for American remote workers, especially the Riviera Maya. Low cost of living, good internet infrastructure, English-speaking expat communities. I could rent a nice apartment for $800 a month, eat well for $15 a day, live better than I did in Chicago for a quarter of the cost. My company had gone fully remote during COVID and never went back. I ran the numbers. Between my savings, the divorce settlement, and selling everything I owned, I could put together about $180,000. Living in Mexico, that money could last me 4 or 5 years, even if I never worked again. The math was simple. Chicago rent, $2,800 a month. Mexico rent, $800 a month. I could save more money living well in Mexico than I could living poorly in Chicago. It wasn't about running away from my problems. It was about running toward a solution. I gave my landlord 60 days notice on my apartment, listed my furniture on Facebook Marketplace, sold my car to CarMax. The hardest part was telling my parents. "It's just a midlife crisis," my mother said over dinner. "You'll get tired of the novelty and want to come home." Maybe she was right. But I'd rather risk being wrong about paradise than spend the rest of my life being right about cubicles. I bought a one-way ticket to Cancun, first class, because it felt like celebrating. Packed 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, left everything else behind. Either I was about to make the smartest decision of my life, or the dumbest. I was about to find out which. The flight to Cancun was 3 hours and 45 minutes, but it felt like traveling to a different planet. This wasn't a tourist trip with a return date circled on a calendar. This was permanent, or at least as permanent as anything could be when you're starting over at 45. I'd rented an apartment in Playa del Carmen sight unseen. Carlos, the landlord, met me at the airport with a sign that had my name on it. Professional guy, spoke perfect English, drove a clean Honda Civic, The apartment was better than I'd expected. Clean, modern, reliable air conditioning, fast Wi-Fi. The building had a small pool and a rooftop terrace with ocean views. My neighbors were a mix of Mexican families and expats from the US and Canada. I unpacked my 2 suitcases, set up my laptop on the dining table, and logged into my company's VPN. Just like that, I was working from paradise. The first few weeks were exactly what I dreamed about during those gray Chicago afternoons. I'd wake up at sunrise, make coffee, work for a few hours, then take breaks to walk on the beach or swim in the ocean. Lunch was usually tacos from a street vendor, 40 pesos for 3 tacos that were better than anything I'd ever had in Chicago. I was spending roughly $2,000 a month on everything. In Chicago, I'd been spending that much on rent alone. The work was going well. My team back in Chicago didn't seem to notice or care that I was calling in from a different time zone. I was delivering projects on time, participating in meetings, contributing to the company's success from a beach chair when I wanted to. The nomad life felt sustainable, practical, smart. 3 months in, I'd settled into a routine that felt sustainable for the long term. I joined a co-working space called Nest, where other digital nomads worked during the day and socialized in the evenings. It was a community of designers, developers, writers, consultants, all of us proving that geography and productivity weren't connected the way traditional employers believed. It was there on a Tuesday afternoon in February that I met Sophia. She was working on her laptop at the table next to mine, taking notes in Spanish while listening to what sounded like a business call. When her call ended, I introduced myself. American guy, software engineering, been in Playa del Carmen for a few months. She was Mexican, from Mexico City originally, working as a marketing consultant for hotels and restaurants in the Riviera Maya. Bilingual, college educated, sharp sense of humor. We started having lunch together at the co-working space, then dinner a few times a week, then weekend trips to cenotes and Mayan ruins. Sophia was different from anyone I dated in Chicago, not because she was Mexican, but because she was ambitious without being anxious about it. She'd grown up in Mexico City, gotten her marketing degree, worked for big international companies before starting her own consultancy. She chose to live in Playa del Carmen because she could do the same work for less stress and more life satisfaction. By May, 6 months after I'd arrived in Mexico, Sophia and I were spending most of our time together. It felt natural, adult, the kind of relationship I'd tried to build during my marriage but never quite achieved. But there's something about feeling too comfortable that makes you careless about the things that got you comfortable in the first place. By month 7, I was working fewer hours, taking longer lunch breaks, saying yes to weekend trips that meant missing Monday morning meetings with Chicago. My productivity was still acceptable, but it wasn't exceptional like it had been during my first few months. The first warning sign came in July. My manager, Rebecca, scheduled a one-on-one meeting that she called Performance Check-In. I dialed in from my apartment, laptop propped on the dining table, ocean visible through the balcony door. Rebecca was calling from her office in Chicago, grey sky visible through her window. "Mike, I want to talk about your engagement level over the past few weeks," she said, getting straight to the point. "You've been late to 3 meetings this month, missed the client presentation last Tuesday, and your project updates have been shorter and less detailed than usual." She wasn't wrong. I'd been treating my job like a part-time obligation instead of the full-time responsibility it was. "I know you're enjoying the location independence," Rebecca continued, "but the work output needs to remain consistent regardless of where you're logging in from." I assured her it wouldn't be a problem, that I'd refocus and get back to my previous performance level. And for a few weeks I did. But by September, I was falling into the same patterns. Sophia and I had planned a week-long trip to Alcaca. I'd requested vacation days, been approved, everything was official. But when we got back, I felt disconnected from work projects that had moved forward without me. My team had made decisions, solved problems, hit deadlines while I was eating mole and touring mezcal distilleries. For the first time since I'd arrived in Mexico, I wondered if my job was as secure as I'd assumed it would be. The conversation I'd been avoiding happened in October, almost exactly 1 year after I'd left Chicago. Rebecca scheduled another one-on-one, this time with an HR representative. I knew what that meant before the call started. Mike, we're making some organizational changes that are going to affect your position, Rebecca said. Your role is being eliminated as part of a restructuring initiative. Your last day will be November 15th. You'll receive 4 weeks severance pay and COBRA benefits information. Just like that, the income that had made my Mexico lifestyle possible was gone. 4 weeks severance plus vacation pay meant I had about $8,000 coming. My savings account had $142,000, down from the $180,000 I'd started with a year ago. At that burn rate, I had 4 or 5 years of runway if I couldn't find another job. But finding another job might be harder than I'd anticipated. Most tech companies had ended their pandemic-era remote work policies, requiring employees to be in the office at least 3 days a week. I started applying for positions immediately, but the responses were lukewarm. Virtual interviews from my apartment in Playa del Carmen seemed to make hiring managers uncomfortable. Great qualifications, but we're really looking for someone local, was the standard rejection. I tried positioning myself as available for relocation, but my Mexico address raised questions about visa status, tax complications, and commitment to returning to the United States. After 2 months of applications and phone screens that didn't lead to offers, I realized I needed a backup plan. Sophia had been supportive during the job search, helping me practice interview questions and offering to introduce me to business contacts in Mexico who might need technical consulting. But I could see the concern in her eyes when I talked about maybe moving back to Chicago temporarily to find work. Why would you want to leave all of this? She asked one evening as we walked along the beach. You could start your own consulting business here, work with international clients remotely. You have enough savings to get it established. She wasn't wrong about the savings, but she didn't understand the visa situation. My tourist visa allowed me to stay in Mexico for 6 months at a time, but it didn't permit me to work for Mexican companies or establish a business. I could work remotely for US clients, but finding those clients was proving difficult from outside the country. After 3 months of unemployment, I was starting to feel the financial pressure. My monthly expenses had crept up to $3,000 once I'd added health insurance, emergency funds, and travel costs for job interviews back in the United States. At that rate, my savings would last about 3 years, assuming nothing unexpected happened. Something unexpected was about to happen. The visa renewal trip to Guatemala should have been routine. Every 6 months, tourists have to leave Mexico and re-enter to reset their visitor status. Most expats take quick trips to Belize or Guatemala, spend a night or two across the border, then return with a fresh tourist visa. I'd done it once before without any problems. But this time, the immigration officer at the Cancun airport looked at my passport more carefully than usual. "What is your purpose for these extended stays in Mexico?" he asked in English. I explained that I was a remote worker, living in Mexico legally on tourist visas while working for American clients. "Do you have proof of employment?" he asked. That's when things got complicated. I didn't have proof of employment because I was unemployed. After 30 minutes of questions and phone calls to supervisors, he stamped my passport with a 30-day tourist visa instead of the standard 180-day permit. "You must leave Mexico within 30 days, he said. 30 days wasn't enough time to find a job, pack my belongings, and figure out where to go next. But it was what I had. Sophia was devastated when I told her what had happened at the airport. "There must be something we can do," she said. "Maybe if we hired an immigration lawyer, applied for a work visa, looked into other options." The problem was that work visas in Mexico required a job offer from a Mexican employer, and I didn't have skills that Mexican companies needed enough to sponsor a foreigner. I could marry Sophia, get a spouse visa, but we'd been dating for 8 months, and visa status wasn't a good foundation for marriage decisions. Neither of us was ready for that kind of commitment, and both of us knew that doing it for immigration purposes would poison whatever real relationship we were building. I started making plans to return to Chicago, at least temporarily, to regroup and figure out my next move. But Sophia became increasingly upset as my departure date approached. "You're abandoning everything we've built together," she said during what turned out to be our last dinner together. "If you really cared about this relationship, about life here, you'd find a way to make it work." I understood her frustration, but I also understood my financial reality. I had enough money to live comfortably for a while, but not enough to live indefinitely without income, especially if I was going to face visa restrictions every 6 months. The week before my required departure, I started liquidating my life in Mexico, sold my furniture to other expats, gave away books and kitchen equipment, packed my belongings back into the same 2 suitcases I'd arrived with. My year and a half in Playa del Carmen fit into the same amount of luggage I'd brought, but somehow it felt like I was leaving more behind than I'd originally brought with me. The relationship with Sophia ended the way relationships end when geography becomes impossible and neither person is wrong, but the situation is unsolvable. No dramatic fights, no cheating, no betrayal, just the slow realization that we wanted different things and lived in different realities. She wanted someone who would commit permanently to life in Mexico. I wanted stability I could count on indefinitely. We were both reasonable, and we were both incompatible with each other's constraints. The flight back to Chicago felt like defeat, even though I tried to frame it as strategic retreat. I'd lived in Mexico for 18 months, spent about $45,000, and returned to the United States with $135,000 in savings and no job prospects. That wasn't failure by any objective measure, but it felt like failure because I was giving up on something I'd wanted to work. I rented a short-term apartment in Logan Square, started attending networking events, sent my resume to every tech company in Chicago. After 3 months of interviews, I got an offer for a senior developer position at a financial services company. Good salary, decent benefits, 3 days in the office per week. Back to cubicle life, back to commuting, back to the existence I'd left behind 2 years earlier. But I was 47 years old now, and I'd spent $180,000 learning that geographical solutions don't solve personal problems, they just relocate them to more expensive addresses. The hardest part about being back in Chicago wasn't the weather or the commute or the office politics. It was the realization that my Mexico adventure had been expensive therapy rather than life transformation. I'd gone to Mexico thinking I was escaping the corporate grind, but I'd taken the corporate worker with me. I'd thought I was building a sustainable alternative lifestyle, but I'd been living off savings while pretending it was income. I'd thought I was mature enough to handle a relationship with someone from a different culture, but I'd expected her to understand my visa problems the way an American girlfriend would understand career complications. None of it had been wrong, exactly, but none of it had been as simple as I'd imagined when I'd been sitting in that conference room in Chicago, planning my escape from ordinary life. Sophia and I exchanged messages for a few months after I returned to the United States. Holiday greetings, updates on work projects, the kind of communication people maintain when they don't want to admit a relationship is over, but both know it's impossible to continue. She met someone else, a Canadian guy who'd gotten a work visa and was staying in Mexico permanently. I was happy for her, genuinely, but also envious of his ability to make the life work that I'd failed to sustain. My savings account, now at $119,000, was a constant reminder that I'd spent $61,000 over 2 years, proving that running away from problems doesn't solve them, it just makes them more expensive. I could have stayed in Chicago, kept my job, invested that money in retirement accounts or real estate. Instead, I'd bought 2 years of beautiful weather and a relationship that couldn't survive visa restrictions. Some education is worth the cost. Some education is just expensive. I still follow expat groups on social media, still see the posts from people living the remote work dream in Mexico, Portugal, Thailand. Some of them are probably making it work long term, building sustainable lives in places that make them happy. Some of them are probably where I was in month 18, spending savings while hoping something permanent works out. The difference between success and failure in the nomad life isn't courage or money or even visa status. It's the ability to distinguish between a vacation and a lifestyle, between temporary and sustainable, between what you want life to feel like and what you need life to actually be. I'm back in Chicago now, working in an office, saving money for retirement like a responsible adult. It's not the adventure I'd imagined when I'd sold everything to move to paradise, but it's predictable, which has value I didn't appreciate when I was younger and thought predictability was the enemy of happiness. Sometimes the biggest risk is believing that risk-taking is always the right choice. The guy in the hostel bunk above me is still snoring. My laptop is still dead. My flight home is still unaffordable until I figure out how to ask my family for help without admitting how completely I misjudged my ability to make paradise practical. But I'm not angry about the experience, not really. I'm just older and poorer and more aware of the difference between dreaming about a different life and actually living one. If you've ever thought about selling everything and moving somewhere beautiful and cheap and far from home, just remember that beautiful and cheap and far from home doesn't change who you are or what problems you're actually trying to solve. Sometimes the life you're running from is the life you need to fix instead of the life you need to leave.